Welcome to the latest episode of How Shit Gets Made, a glimpse into the secret world that influences how products, services, and brands come into our lives. Welcome, everybody. This is the latest episode of How Shit Gets Made, the podcast from MindSpark Research International, where we are trying to introduce the world of consumer research to those who participate in it and or benefit from it. So we're always sharing a lot of different new perspectives with people on how they impact the brands, products, and services that we interact with in our daily lives. Today, I have two guests with me. First ever married couple. Very excited to see how this is going to go. So I've got Nina with me. And Nina, you and I collaborated together a few years back, a couple of times, I believe, on some projects, and always been really impressed with your work. So Nina, maybe you could tell us a bit about what you are up to these days as an introduction.
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having us. It's really great fun. Was looking forward to have this chat. I'm initially a psychologist and a qualitative researcher since over 15 years now. Worked for Research International, Cantartin as Point Blank. Actually, I've been traveling the world for Fmcg projects. So probably any industry or category you're telling me, I can tell you, yes, I've done research on that. And since 2017, I stepped out of being an employee and started being a freelancer. And since then, I also widened my field, not only from qualitative market research, but also going into design thinking. I've been giving design thinking trainings for a consulting agency worldwide. And last but not least, I think 3 years ago, I stepped into the area of UX research. Mm-hmm. So I think that's also something we have in common, having Definitely. The market research part, but also the UX research part. Mm-hmm. That's kind of like me in a nutshell.
Excellent. And you have brought with you today someone that I have never met before, having met you several times. So maybe, Dirk, you could introduce yourself a bit.
Yes, of course. First of all, also from me, thanks for having us. That's really cool. My name is Dirk, and I'm Nina's husband. And I've worked in sales and sales leadership for the last 20 years. I've worked for a long time in the image licensing industry for Getty Images and for Corbis. I worked as a sales director in an ad tech startup here in Berlin. I worked in software as a service sales, and I've been a managing director in a digital agency here in Berlin. That's
a broad range of experiences. Yes. Really cool background. Excellent. I don't mean to put you on the spot right off the bat, but actually, I've been told that there are some people who listen to the podcast who don't necessarily come from our world, Nina. So you mentioned some terms that I'm just going to throw back to you. So maybe you could tell us, what is FMCG? Because there are plenty of people who listen and they're like, what is FMCG? And I will say also, as I'm sure you are aware, people on the other side of the pond in a particular continent known as North America don't use the same phrase, FMCG. So maybe you could tell us a bit about what is this?
Actually, I didn't know about the other ones not using FMCG, but here in Europe, or how I grew up in the research industry, FMCG stands for fast-moving consumer goods. So that's anything you purchase and use quickly, from toothbrush, toothpaste, to drinks, to chocolate, so it's not like the long-standing stuff you buy and have there for years, so cars or whatsoever, but really the stuff you consume very fast. So how's it called in the US?
CPG, so it's consumer packaged goods.
So
it doesn't have the fast-moving thing, but it implies kind of the same thing. It wouldn't be cars, for example, because it's a packaged good and it's consumer and not B2B. So voila. And then the other term I'm going to ask you really quickly, you're more than welcome to decline, by the way, because I think in this particular case it's a little bit more complicated. If you are able to sum this up, would be forever grateful. You also mentioned design thinking. I know there are a lot of people going, what the heck is design thinking? In our world, a lot of people know what design thinking is, but maybe you could try to give us a glimpse of what design thinking is.
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, sorry for using all these terms.
No, don't apologize. It's great.
I'm just realizing that I'm probably like already living in my bubble. Design thinking is a process which is actually focusing on how to solve complex problems. I mean, that's design thinking in a nutshell. And the process is about collaborating with different stakeholders, pulling research in there, really understanding the problem. And at the end of the day, of course, crafting a solution. So it's been, how to say, I think it's on the rise, or it has been on the rise, like in the last 5 to 10 years. And a lot of clients, companies are working with it. So complex problem solving, I think that's it in a nutshell.
That's excellent. That is the shortest and most comprehensive answer for design thinking sum up that I've heard. So very well done. And Dirk, are you familiar with design thinking? Obviously, you've heard Nina be talking about it before, but do you kind of understand this process?
I learned to understand it, yeah. It's not something that came up in my line of work or in my career ever, but I learned it through Nina and through a good old friend of mine who I went to school with, who has a design thinking agency here in Berlin, actually.
Oh, wow.
And went to the original D school where they came up with that concept. So it is something that you encounter quite frequently if you live in Berlin, for example. It doesn't matter where you work actually, but it is quite the talk of the town.
Was design thinking born in Berlin?
Well, it was initially born in San Francisco, I think, but it came quite quickly to Berlin because SAP opened the Hasso-Plattner Institute, the HPI here in Potsdam, right outside of Berlin, and they were like the big school in Europe teaching it. So.
Oh, fantastic. Well, for the people listening to the podcast, the reason why I wanted Nina and Nina +1, which so gratefully happened to be her husband, to join is because, part of what's been really interesting in this Spark Sesh series is hearing about how I'm calling them research people think about their work, and then non-research people perceive the work of researchers or don't, and kind of what is that interaction like, and kind of it's really great for me as a research person to hear some of the observations that non-research people have. It's very eye-opening, and I think it's really interesting as well, hopefully for the non-research people, to hear us talk about some of the things we do that really impact their lives. So I was talking about this idea with Nina, who mentioned that actually she had a similar kind of rabbit hole exploration with her husband, and that is what brought us all together today. So maybe you guys could tell us a little bit about this conversation you had over coffee that led to some of the collaboration that you two are doing, not just as a couple but professionally now. Yeah,
I could do that in a second. Because I wanted to sort of answer your question first. When you say how non-research people see research people, I want to tell you a little story about our very first date.
Love it.
So I had never had any encounter with qualitative market research before I met Nina. So I didn't even know that existed. And so we had our very first day. We were sitting in a bar, and I asked her what she did. So she told me, and I couldn't really get a grip of what that actually entailed, what she was doing. So she actually told me to my face after 2 hours what dishwashing, laundry detergent I used, what brand, and she was right.
Wow.
And she could also explain why she knew, and she had me down. It was spot on. Her whole explanation was spot on why she knew which detergent I used, and she was right. It was exactly the one that I had sitting on my washing machine at home, and that was really impressive. And so I married her. No, but
I was gonna say, and then the second date was the ring. And
no, but but I always think back of that first date, not only for that reason, but for me that was that was such a good picture of what market researchers do, and it really stuck with me, and I told that story to a lot of people who also couldn't understand what market research does. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a great story too, because, one of the things that has inspired me to do this series with having someone else on the podcast that isn't just, research people that I already know, is that every time I talk to someone about qualitative research, they always feel like there's a little bit of an overlap with what they do. So if you talk to a psychologist, for example, they're like, yes, that sounds a lot like what I do in my therapy sessions. Or if you talk to a journalist, they say, yes, that sounds a lot like what I do when I'm interviewing my sources. Or if you talk to, I don't know, a detective, they say, yes, that's a lot like what I do. And so I'm really trying to kind of span a lot of different backgrounds like yours, Dirk, working in sales and all this kind of stuff, and say, okay, so what's the overlap here? And how did you perceive this work? So that's a really great story.
Yeah, exactly. And to your other question, so where does the overlap start? There's a lot of overlap that we discovered over the course of us being together and talking over dinner. But I think the one thing that really sticks out is, as a salesperson, one of the key things that makes a successful salesperson is to be able to ask the right questions. And Nina, that is actually something that Nina is very, very good at, is interview technique, not in a sense of being able to just push the right buttons, but being genuinely interested in the other person's needs and desires and what actually behind it. So if you can't do that, you can't be a successful salesperson. So I think that was pretty early on that we discovered that both our jobs had that in common.
Yeah. Now, with, how to say, kind of doing similar things, but with a different focus or objective.
Yeah. Which I think, I don't know what you think, Nina. We could probably do an entirely separate podcast episode about this topic. But what you're saying also reminds me of the fact of sometimes clients watch qualitative research and then they think, oh, I could do that. And then they try to go DIY, but they're missing that, their interest lies somewhere else because they've got objectives that they need to meet and stakeholders, breathing down their neck. And they're not literally like, I would like to know more about you and understanding kind of the context around something. So they may say, okay, well, all I have to do is write a discussion guide and then go ask these questions. And they do that and their research is less rich and then they don't understand why. And I think, Dirk, you've just really explained sort of the magic of having a talented qualitative researcher on your team, such as Nina. So that's great. So tell me a bit more about how did the conversation progress in terms of understanding overlap?
I think one of the things we are also discussing quite often, and actually that brings me to a story that happened last week. I did have group discussions, very, very tricky ones, tricky topic. And I had the clients listening, and I did have the presentation last week. And the one client, he was like totally over his head saying like, oh gosh, I'm so thankful that you moderated and not me, because I would have prompted, I wouldn't have let people have the space, because I was asking for brand perception and there was no brand perception. So there was 30 seconds of silence, and he just said like, oh my gosh. And those 30 seconds of silence were probably the most important thing in that entire research. And as a neutral question person, you can leave that silence. Whereas if you do have another objective, like, I don't know, trying to sell something or explaining something, you can't leave that silence. But okay, now I forgot the question.
The question was where the overlap between
continuing as you learned more and more about each other's sort of experience and the overlap you both had.
You have something on your mind, you go ahead.
No, exactly. So for me as a salesperson, it was really interesting to see that there is a job out there where people actually engage into deep conversations with clients to find out stuff about them without the objective having to sell something. And that is something that we as salespeople never have. We never have that privilege to do that because we have an objective behind it. And so that led us in our conversation to the realization that a lot of the stuff that market researchers find out are very, very, could be very, very helpful for the sales process and could be woven into the sales guides and into the discussions if only salespeople knew about them. And what we realized was that there's such such divided fields actually within companies. The salespeople never hear about that qualitative research, really. I mean, the marketing people know about it, and but at the time that the salespeople get the product and get to sell it, they don't really hear about why it was designed in a certain way or what kind of research or insights led to it being created a certain way. And it could be such a great head start if you're beginning a sales process with a new product or a new feature or something, if there could be an exchange, and also the other way around.
Yeah. And I think like really the main thing we also talked about is like when I go into these interviews or group discussions, I always clarify upfront, I'm like 100% neutral. And I don't want to sell you anything. Actually, that's a sentence I always start my interviews with.
Sure.
Because I don't want people to feel that they have to give me specific answers. And I think that's really a door opener because my interview partners know that it's not like if I talk with them about pain points or what doesn't work, that I'm like, oh, hey, by the way, and here I have the solution for $19.99, I'm going to sell it to you. But they realize that I'm really interested in understanding, hey, what is your pain point, how to say, without a consequence for them. And that's something a salesperson would never be able to do because, of course, in the back of the head, people have the feeling like, okay, if I'm go too much in depth of what's not working right now, okay, I'm going to sign a contract for a washing machine or whatsoever. So,
yeah, they're more guarded, and so this is when talking to a salesperson. I mean, I'm like that myself. So I think that salespeople could really profit a lot from those insights, or even being like listening to interviews or being part of interview or watching interviews behind the screen or whatever, because it would tell them a lot that stuff that would help them in their sales endeavors and stuff that they usually wouldn't find out. But also, on the other hand, I think sales departments are sitting on a wealth of information that could actually really help research projects in their setup. And in a lot of instances, I've worked at companies where we were actually really good working with Salesforce, which is a customer relationship management software tool that a lot of companies use, where we actually gathered a ton of information that could have been very, very useful. And when I told Nina about that, for example, because Nina had a new client, there was a startup, and they were trying to improve their product and doing research. And when I told Nina, why don't they talk to their sales department? They probably have a ton of stuff already there that they're not even aware of. And that was the case, right?
Yep. Yeah.
So they had already in their Salesforce, they had stuff that they could tap into right away because sales guys gather that for their sales process. But
right.
It's very, very, very helpful for very basic, just to see where you're at, what the status quo is, why are people not buying, or where are they going otherwise. And so to set up a proper research project, that is a gold mine.
So why do you think there is this separation, by the way? Why, because everything you're saying, I'm like, yes, I have worked with marketing people. I have worked with product designers. I've worked with product developers. I don't know the last time I've worked with a salesperson. I can't remember if it's ever happened.
Maybe I start from the researcher view, because actually the project that Dirk just referred to was a very difficult B2B target group. So business to business, very difficult to recruit. So it was absolutely obvious we're not going to be able to talk to the users or the purchasers of the product just by using our normal market research recruitment ways. So actually, well, talking to Dirk, and he said, like, wow, why don't you ask the sales guys? They probably are on the phone with exactly these people every day. I brought that idea into the organization, and they really, we ran against walls, because the sales team was quite clear that they didn't want someone chatting to their contacts, which I can understand, and probably you can tell more about that in a second, Dirk.
Yes.
But because you can totally understand that. But I was just like, hey guys, we have the contacts. You talk to them anyway. Why am I, or why is my research team not allowed to talk to these people about basics? I don't know, what do you really need? What are challenges? What keeps you away from reaching your goals and whatsoever? And we didn't succeed. We weren't able to use that rich treasure chest of contacts.
Yeah, which is a shame, like I said. But let me explain this from a sales side, because I'm explaining this also to, if any of the listeners encounter a similar situation, they kind of know where salespeople are coming from, and also might help to overcome that resistance. Salespeople are just very protective of their clients, because they know that their clients' time, for example, is very, very precious. And that is that other than a researcher who has set up a meeting with those people, who then, if they're not Corona times, they come into a studio and they set aside an hour or two where they get paid to be there, and they get an incentive, and then they sit there, and then they're open for this conversation. As a salesperson, you only get them, if you're lucky, you're having a meeting, but then they set aside like 20 minutes, and you have to get as much stuff in there as possible. And then you're really proud of what you achieve in that time. And then over time, especially if it's complicated products like the one you were talking about, you want to be, as a salesperson, you want to be someone on eye level for the client, someone that the client sees as a peer more than someone asking stupid questions. You want to be seen as someone by the client who thinks like, oh, this guy really gets me. Dirk really, I can talk to him like he's my colleague. He understands all this stuff. And then then having someone from the same company call the client up and ask seemingly really dumb basic questions is something that is something that the sales guy would it's just a horror to think about that, because he thinks that it will destroy all that connection and all that expertise that he has built over a long period of time. But what I was saying is that, that might be hard to overcome, but for example, there's always lapsed clients. There's always clients who are not buying anymore, who have bought in the past or just never bought, but they're still in the database. And so that would be an entrance as a researcher. If I would go to talk to salespeople and ask them for contacts, I would have them give me those kind of contacts, because it might be really difficult to get a sales guy to give you really hot contacts that he's working on right now. He's so close to signing them, and he doesn't want anyone to mess that up. But there's a ton of clients he's sitting on that are not doing anything, and that could be really, really valuable for researchers also.
So I have two questions off the back of this. So one like contradicts something that I was saying earlier in the discussion. And the other one is, just, I don't know, mystery. So given all of this that you have just explained, in my mind, I'm like, well, what's the solution? And there's two ideas. They're not the only two, but there are two ideas that I would love to hear from you on. One is, why don't we as researchers interview the salespeople? I mean, are they not, capable of saying, well, based on my experience, I've talked to many people who have encountered this issue and this is how they solve it, and etc. And so that's question one, which is mystery. And then question two, which is the one that contradicts what I was saying earlier, is what about the idea of maybe training some of the salespeople to do portions of the qualitative interview so that on their sales calls, they can actually ask some questions. Maybe we have access to the recordings of those conversations, or maybe they write up, some little report that the researcher can then take and amalgamate into something useful. So any thoughts on either of those?
I mean, the second one is something that I find that is a great, this is a great idea, because like I said earlier on, those conversations are not so different from each other anyway. A qualitative interview is not so different from a really good sales call, especially in the early stages. If we're talking about a complex product, the first calls will be all about understanding the needs and also the deeper needs of the client. So I think it would be an excellent idea to train them a little bit more and to give them, to slip in some other questions that they might not ask in a regular call, but that also don't feel unnatural to them, because it's not so far apart from what they're doing anyway.
Yeah, but as to challenge what you've said, and this is why I was saying I'm contradicting myself, and to refer to what Nina mentioned earlier, is that salespeople do have an agenda, right? So are the participants as willing to answer those questions honestly to a salesperson as they would be to a third party? Tricky.
Exactly. My hypothesis would be no. However, I think it always depends on the situation. I mean, asking salespersons to do these interviews with the other option of not talking at all to the client, yes, that I would take everything I get. And also, I mean that's a thing we always have to be aware of as researchers. Anyhow, is there a bias, and what is the bias? And I think if we are aware that probably the situation is different because a salesperson asked maybe the exactly same questions, I think you can still work with the results. So best case scenario would be a well-trained researcher talks to the client. If we somehow can't make that happen, salesperson doing that, I think that's a good idea.
But I would also, now listening to Nina, I would also not only suggest salespeople listening into research calls, but also researchers listening into good sales calls, because I feel that that there's a preconception here, and that is probably because most people haven't experienced a good B2B sales call. Because when we hear sales calls, we think about the people who call us at home and try to sell us, I don't know, mobile
something you
contracts.
don't need, something you don't want.
Stuff you don't need, stuff you've never asked for, and stuff you don't want. A B2B sales call, especially with complicated and large products, is a different game, and a good sales guy also knows when to drop the rope and to say, okay, if this is how you feel, then our product is just not right for you, and let's leave it at that. So because it sounds from what and I can totally understand, because I know that sales has that rep. And so this is why listening in, on the other hand, might surprise some researchers how in-depth those conversations can be, actually.
Yeah, good point. Point taken.
Without pushing a product onto someone.
Point taken. I have to admit, I was building the UX research department at TIR, e-mobility startup here in Berlin, and actually that is something we did. We like had a little program whenever people were onboarded that they were, well, it wasn't sales, it was customer support, but there were also like some salespeople there. So yes, you're absolutely right. We did that. Yeah.
Good.
And this links to my other, potential solution, which is what about interviewing the salespeople themselves as participants to say, okay, well, you've spoken to X number of people and you've gotten all this information. What can you tell us about the problem, the question?
May I start?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, such a polite married couple, no bickering.
Well, you should see us at night at the dinner table having discussions. Well, the thing is, for me, it kind of depends on also what step of the process we're talking about. Like, for example, the startup I'm consulting, we've already been talking about. The interviews would have been about product development. So, like a product which really didn't exist yet. Or how to say, well, the MVP existed, was like features, So in that situation, I would be afraid if I would talk to the salespeople that based on anecdotal knowledge, like I talked to 3 clients and, oh, by the way, they also want pink unicorns and they want to have a fairy tale and blah, blah, that you kind of get a wish list based on one interview, but not like the in-depth problem understanding I would need. However, I have the feeling if we are in a later step, if I have a salesperson who this product is already, I don't know, kind of a finish or quite far along the development pipeline, and then talking to salespersons, I think that's great because they do have that knowledge, but I think you have to be aware when might you be used to write a feature wish list.
Yeah, exactly. I totally agree with Nina here. If you ask, if you would be asking salespeople at a too early stage, you would get exactly that, because at that stage, because the agenda of the sales guy in the end is to get the sale, and if a client tells him we want that button to be red and then I would buy it, then this is what he would tell you. And but let me phrase it a little different. I learned from Nina that I learned from her so many things, but also the way she asks questions in interviews is quite different than a salesperson would ask, because it's much more open and it leaves much more space, and it leaves those empty 3 seconds that she was talking about in the beginning that most salespeople wouldn't even be able to stand. And so if you're talking to salespeople, I don't think you will get the depth or you would get to the core of what you're actually looking for. You would get a lot of anecdotes and you would get a lot of wishes at an early stage. So at a later stage, it might be different.
Mm-hmm. So have you ever, Dirk, witnessed Nina in action? I imagine now it's a bit interesting because we're all of us doing a lot of our work at home. So maybe she's in another room and you hear her asking some questions to a participant or something like this.
Yeah, I actually have, because I had some time, and someone who was writing the protocol was taking notes, was sick, and so I volunteered to do that. So I wrote, I took notes for a couple of group sessions, actually. And yes, I was very impressed, particularly with that ability to be so non-biased, to just leave them be. I would have the urge to correct them a lot more if they're saying stupid things that are just not true. and it's just amazing to me how Nina sits there and says like, yes, okay, Okay, yeah, Jeff Bezos.
It takes practice, I must say.
Jeff Bezos is the CEO of Google. Yeah, Jeff Bezos. Okay, I write that down. And I'm like, no, he's not. But she could just stand that, you know. And that is totally amazing to me. And that and the persistence that is necessary to really get something. I would give up way earlier if someone says, "No, I don't know," and then she asks again. And then she leaves the space, and then until it's so uncomfortable that something comes out of that person. And I was like, wow, how'd you do that? That was really amazing to me, because I would have said, okay, he doesn't know. And it's torture for him at this point. He doesn't want to answer this question. But then I think this is where the real magic comes in, when you know, yeah, I torture him, but I know that there's something there. And then it comes out, and then you're like, wow, that quote just made the whole session, you know? So, yeah.
I love this way of describing it. It's torturous, but it's a torture of love.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is probably the last time someone booked me for interviews now.
No, but you guys know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
It has to hurt a little, I think.
I think it's really interesting to hear from your perspective as well, because as you're describing this, I'm thinking, well, as a salesperson, your job is to make someone feel really comfortable and to make them like to lubricate the conversation, you know, as it were. And Nina's job is to build rapport and trust. But trust doesn't always necessarily mean easy conversation or comfortable conversation. So it's a bit of a different objective. Nina, you were going to say?
No, exactly. I was just like still with the torturing thing, and I should maybe reconsider. No, actually, what I was thinking about. I've been probably Nikki, you as well. I've been training a lot of juniors through the course of my years as researchers, and it's so interesting that of course. There are always these tiny things where you feel like, how do you teach them? And I think what Dirk just said this, let's stay with the word torture, although but how to say, having the feeling of, but hey, there is something, you know, I mean, at a certain point, I accept that person doesn't have an opinion on the brand. But at least trying it from another angle or a third angle, and then giving up, and that feeling, and when you do it and how you do it, I think that's like one of the major things a junior researcher needs to learn, you know, like of not stepping out too early and saying like, oh, they said everything's great. Yeah. Let's go to the next topic. Where I feel like, oh, really? Let's just look at this one more time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it is a really tricky thing to teach, because there are some moments where you can let those comments pass. It depends on how closely their answer is tied to the objectives of the research, and being able to keep the client objectives in mind all the time, so that you can make sure you're diving into the right things and letting people express themselves about other things that are also interesting. But yeah, so that's great. So before meeting Nina, Dirk, did you ever participate in research? Had you ever been a research participant of any kind?
No. Maybe once in a mall in the US, where I was taken to a back room and asked about beer. And that was about it. But there was free beer.
They asked a German about beer in a mall?
Yeah, they didn't know
Alarming.
I was German. So. No, I had never participated before I met Nina. No, so I.
Okay. And then your kind of first real introduction was her basically Sherlock Holmesing your laundry detergent.
Oh yeah.
And obviously,
it's hard to be married to a researcher.
But do you know how many laundry detergents there are in a store? I mean, it's really amazing for someone to be able to pin down which one are you using.
So I think we have to go into this a little further. How did you know, Nina? How did you know?
Yes, please explain.
Well, I mean, I guess not all listeners will be familiar to the German laundry detergent market. But back then, I was doing a lot of work for laundry detergents. So I was really in the topic. And the thing was, had a segmentation in the back of my head. Because I figured like, okay, looking at the clothes Dirk was wearing, it's like, okay, clothes are important. So caring for the clothes is probably important as well. So he didn't look like someone who like, I don't care, I don't mind, and taking the cheapest value for money brand. But I figured the second thing was I knew he was single and I knew he was living alone. So male, single, in his 40s, living alone, doing the laundry himself, caring for clothes. So I figured he probably not going to buy the high-end brands, so like the most expensive on the market, because I figured, like based on what we already talked about, I figured he must have been in between. And then there were specific brands in Germany which came into consideration, but it was kind of the segmentation I had in the back of my head. That was right. I mean, actually, I'm still quite good at doing that to other people, because I remember when meeting his friends, they're like, "Oh, I don't believe it." I'm still quite good at it, I have to admit.
She met my friend when she met my friends, and I told them that story, and they were like, "Yeah, no way she can do that." And she's like, "Yeah, she can." And she did.
So is this your new party trick now? You go into when there are parties, let's say.
Yeah.
But yeah, you can figure it out. Well, it's interesting because I thought for sure at some point there was going to be a smelling of the clothes, to try to understand what scent is it or anything. But no, just from shopping habits and
just segmentation.
Pure old segmentation.
And that was actually the frustrating thing for me in that situation, was like that I'm just a segment, that I'm not. We always think we're so individual and we make our choices. And then at the end of the day, we're just a segment.
Yes. And you were a very clear segment.
We've heard a little bit about how sales and qualitative research overlap and the ways that both sales people and research people could benefit from each other's knowledge. Maybe you could tell us a little bit more about the Nidos Academy that you're building together.
Go ahead, Nina.
Well, you're the salesperson.
Okay. I start and then I hand it over to Nina. So the thing was that we actually thought about what would we like our lives to look like, and what would we like to do, and then we actually thought we would really like to work together, and then we thought about what could we do, and then it turned out that in the past 1 or 2 years, Nina has been approached so many times by companies who would actually who wanted to have research and wanted to have research knowledge built up within their companies, and not so much giving it out to external agencies like traditionally it was done or is still done, but wanted to build up research capacities within their companies to be able to do ongoing research, also UX research and qualitative user research, and to build up that within their companies. And so that gave us an idea, why not try to work with that?
Yeah, and let me step in at this point. I remember the first times these companies reached out to me, I thought like, well, am I stupid? That's going to make me unemployed in the future. Teaching my skills. It's like, so living in these different worlds of market research, UX research, and also design thinking. So it's good that we defined it in the beginning. All these different areas are doing research, no matter if I teach them how to do it properly or if I don't teach them. And I've seen a lot of bad research happening in the past. And I also see that it is partly quite difficult to persuade stakeholders who are against research, who think like, oh, I know it all, my gut feeling tells me, to persuade them to do research. And if you finally manage to persuade those stakeholders and then you do bad research, you lose that stakeholder forever. That person will never, ever believe in research, have research done or whatsoever. And I figure like, oh my gosh, I don't want that to happen. if you want to do the research and you're going to do it anyhow, let me help you do it properly. So that is kind of like the idea behind the Nidos Academy of, building research knowledge for everyone who is interested in, from UX research to design thinking research to market research.
Exactly. So what we did so far is that Nina has come up with a really, really great online course that anyone can actually book and do, which is a very, very good foundation. And we already have ideas for other courses. And we're still very much in the beginning of the project, where we actually try to figure out how would people like to learn those research skills. Ideally, is an online course even the right platform? Would they like to have it face to face? Is it maybe it's a mixture of both? So at this point, we invite everyone to just come to our website and just give us feedback and tell us what they would like to see there, and we would take that into consideration and try to build a place where anyone interested in research can learn and do that. And maybe it's just a small thing that someone's missing and they're already a great researcher, but there's always something about segmentation, for example, or setting up questionnaires or whatever. That is always been a problem where we can help. Or it is
dating.
Yeah, that could be the other function of Nidos Academy is matchmaking, perhaps.
Yeah. So that's where we're at.
That's very exciting. And what's the web address for the Nidos Academy in case any listeners want to visit?
It's www.nidos-academy.org. And Nidos is NIDOS, and Academy with a C.
Great.
I think you can find it based on that, or
yeah. We'll share the link out for sure too as well when we publish. But so this is a really great idea, and I love that you're starting it up. I know a lot of companies, MindSpark as well. We're not doing an academy in the same way that you are, but sometimes companies are coming to us saying, "Can you just train us on how to do certain things?" And I had the same conversation with myself, Nina. Like, Am I working myself out of a job right now? But I also just realized at some stage, in addition to what you said, and people are going to do research. Yes, that's true. And they're going to do it poorly if they don't have training, 100% agreed. But I also think that people's need for research is going to grow faster than their skill set is going to grow. So I imagine that what's going to happen is they'll do a little bit of research and then a really big project will come and they'll say, okay, possibly we need some help with that. And then, and then they become more comfortable taking on a bigger project and so on and so forth. So I think it's really great what you're doing. And do you think, for example, Dirk, that there may be some sales people out there in the world that could benefit from some of the stuff that you would be offering at Nidos Academy?
Absolutely.
Will you have some sales specified content, like research for salespeople or something like this?
We haven't planned that so far, but it's a very good idea.
Well, there you go. I take 10%. No, I'm just kidding.
No, but the thing is, the interesting thing is that that I see with Nina as someone being so experienced in qualitative research, for her to be able to put that into teachable lessons is sometimes a real challenge for her, because also as in a lot of jobs, you're very good at it and you don't even know why or how exactly you're doing it. So this is the interesting point where Nina just sometimes says, I don't know, that you can't teach that. It's just experience. It's like, but
try.
Yeah, but we'll try. There's got to be some solid tricks to that, and we're trying to figure that out together.
Yeah, I can imagine it's tricky, especially if you've been doing something for so long. You're quite separated from any training that you have received at this stage, and so a lot of your kind of habits and ways of working are almost innate at this stage. So
totally. It feels intuitive, although of course I needed those years to build up that intuition. But I think you can learn it. but you need to have the experience. And as you also said, what I really saw with enabling newbies to research is that I also felt that their appreciation of research really grew. Mm-hmm. Because at the beginning, like everyone said, like, yeah, come on, talking 30 minutes or 1 hour with someone, everyone can do it. I was like, yeah, go ahead, go, do it. And after a while, these people come back and say like, wow, okay, well, it was more difficult. I got lost in the interview. My interview partner only talked about their cats, but I wanted to talk with them about how to buy a printer, I mean, there's so much to this entire research thing already in the setting up and how you ask the right questions in the interview, how not getting lost, and then comes to analysis, where I feel like the more I teach people, the more they appreciate what an art it is. It is an art you can learn, but it's not as easy as just saying like, hey, I'm just going to chat for 20 minutes.
And to your question, this is exactly what a salesperson needs to be able to do. Don't lead the conversation. Always be in charge of the conversation. Don't have a client take over the lead of the conversation and take you where he wants. You take him where you want him to be, and being able to ask the right questions with a slightly different approach and with a slightly different goal in mind, but still the basic skills that are required for both conversations are the same.
Excellent. So just kind of a final question to you both, and I'll start with you, Dirk, and maybe Nina, if you have something to add. But as like I was saying from the beginning, a non-research person who became introduced to this world via Nina, what are sort of, the most surprising or interesting things you've learned about the research world from your point of view?
It's a difficult question. I think I was really surprised that this sounds very basic, but I think I was most surprised how big a thing it was. That how much of it was there, and that without me knowing anything about it, it was just permanently going on, and there were facilities with one-way mirrors and all that kind of stuff, and there was a whole industry that I didn't know anything about, and that they had conferences and all that kind of stuff. That was the most surprising thing to me, to be totally honest.
Yeah, well, it's exactly why I wanted to start this podcast series with a non-research person included, is because literally every time I talk to someone who is like new to my life, I don't know, I meet a new neighbor and they say, what do you do? And I say, quantitative research. And they say, what's that? And I explain a little, and I still don't get it. And I explain a little. And then finally, and then somehow at some point, maybe not necessarily always in a date situation, but some point something clicks and they say, oh, okay, now I get what you do. And then they realize there's this world that doesn't exist. I very often, I realize this is, perhaps a little bit American-centric, but I always use the analogy of the Wizard of Oz movie to describe what we do, like research, not just qualitative, but market research and user research in general. We are the man behind the curtain. Everyone sees the product and the brand, but it's the research behind that makes everything appear the way it does. And nobody knows we exist. So I think what you're saying is really not surprising to me. And I wouldn't say it's basic. I think it's a fantastic sum up of how a lot of people experience our world without realizing it. Anything to add, Nina, about any of that?
No, actually, I think that really hits the point that, and I just remember like the first times I explained to you, like, there is this facility with the one-way mirror. Like, what? people sit in a room, that's like Navy CIS, and on the other side, like yeah, and that's what I'm doing. So I'm kind of on the stage the entire time. Well, we don't pandemic times, we don't do that right now, but
It's funny that you mentioned CIS and something like this show, because my partner and I, we were watching some crime show, something where there was a one-way mirror. And in the episode, the guy says, "Oh, you don't believe me that there's people watching behind the mirror?" And he walks over to the wall and flips the switch on the other side, and then all the observers. And I said, "No, there's no light switch in this room." And he's like, "What are you talking about?" And I'm like, "That's not how these rooms are designed. I know. I've been in them many, many hours of my life."
Yeah.
Well, anyway, it's the end of our hour. So I just want to thank you both again so much for coming. This has honestly been a fantastic conversation. It's been so great to hear your perspective, Dirk, and to hear more about all the great things you're up to, Nina, and Nidos Academy. So thank you both for joining.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us. It was a real joy.
Yeah, likewise.